Dad perfect events. The security alert on my phone lit up at 2:47 p.m. on that Friday afternoon. Someone was at our family cabin in the Blue Ridge Mountains. The motion sensors were going crazy, and the Ring doorbell was sending me live notifications. I was sitting in my home office in Richmond, about to review some quarterly reports for a consulting client, when my phone started buzzing like a nest of angry wasps. My name is Howard Reynolds, I'm 59 years old, and I spent 30 years building a technology consulting firm before I retired 3 years ago. I keep the mountain cabin wired with the latest security tech. Old habits from the corporate world where you document everything and trust nothing. When you've seen as many business partnerships go south as I have, you learn that paranoia is just another word for preparation. I opened the app and saw a silver Range Rover parked in our driveway. I didn't recognize it. The license plate was clear as day through the high-definition camera I had installed last spring. My son Victor was supposed to be at the hospital all weekend. He's a cardiac surgeon and was covering emergency call. His wife Linda had told us at Thanksgiving dinner just 2 days ago that she was taking Carol and Norman, my 6-year-old and 4-year-old grandkids, to her mother's place in Charlotte for the weekend. So, who was at our cabin? And why did my gut feel like someone had just poured ice water into it? I'd driven up there Thursday morning to meet with Oliver Martinez, a contractor, about repairing storm damage from Hurricane Debbie. Some of the deck railings were loose, a few roof shingles had blown off, and I wanted to get everything fixed before winter set in hard. Oliver had to reschedule for Friday afternoon, so I'd driven back home Thursday evening, thinking I'd handle it all over the phone until he could make it up there. Through the security feed, I watched someone get out of the Range Rover. It was Linda. She had keys to the cabin. Victor had given them to her. Years ago, when they got married, back when I thought she was the perfect daughter-in-law. She knew how much that place meant to our family, but what was she doing there? And where were Carol and Norman? Then I saw him. A man I'd never seen before got out of the passenger side. Tall, well-dressed, probably in his early 40s. He moved like he owned the place, confident, comfortable. They walked to the front door together, and there was something about the way they moved that made my blood pressure spike. Way too comfortable, way too familiar. My blood went cold. I called Victor's cell phone immediately. It went straight to voicemail. He was probably in surgery, elbow deep in someone's chest cavity, saving a life while his wife was doing God knows what at our family retreat. I tried the hospital switchboard and they confirmed he was in the OR, had been there since 6 a.m. for a triple bypass procedure. The nurse said he'd be in surgery for at least another 4 hours. I sat there staring. At my phone screen, watching my daughter-in-law let some stranger into our family cabin, the place where my late wife Helen and I had spent 25 years of anniversaries and holidays, where Victor had learned to fish in the creek that ran behind the property, where Carol and Norman had taken their first steps on the wooden deck Helen and I had built with our own hands the second summer we owned the place. This cabin wasn't just property. It was sacred ground. It held every good memory our family had built together over the past quarter century. And now Linda was bringing some other man into that space, like it meant nothing. I had a choice to make right then, and I knew it would define everything that followed. I could drive up there and confront them, bang on the door and demand an explanation, grab that son of a bitch by the throat and throw him off my property. That's what my gut was telling me to do. That's what any father would want to do when his family was being betrayed. But 30 years in business had taught me something important. When you suspect someone is betraying you, don't tip your hand until you have all the facts. The biggest mistakes I'd seen in corporate America came from executives who acted on emotion instead of evidence. They'd storm into meetings, make accusations, demand answers, and end up looking like fools when the other party had covered their tracks or had a reasonable explanation. No, this required a different approach. This required what I do best. Instead of jumping in my truck, I did what had made me successful in business for 3 decades. I started building a case. First, I saved all the security footage, every frame, every angle, every timestamp. The cameras had crystal clear shots of both Linda and the mystery man entering the cabin at exactly 2:52 p.m. I screenshot the Range Rover's license plate, Virginia tags, clear enough to read from space. I saved the motion sensor data, the door logs, everything the system had recorded. In business, documentation is everything. The same rule applied here. Next, I called my old friend Eugene Parker. Eugene runs a private investigation firm in Richmond, specializes in corporate espionage and employee theft cases. We'd worked together on dozens of cases over the years: unfaithful spouses, embezzling employees, industrial espionage, background checks for executive hires. Eugene was discreet, thorough, and he owed me more than a few favors. More importantly, he understood how to build a case that would hold up under scrutiny. "Howard, what's going on?" Eugene answered on the second ring. I could hear traffic in the background. He was probably driving between appointments. "I need a license plate run," I said, keeping my voice steady. "And Eugene, I need this to stay between us for now. That tone tells me this isn't about a business deal gone wrong." "No," I said. "This is personal, very personal." I gave him the license plate numbers. Eugene said he'd get back to me within an hour. While I waited, I did what any good CEO does when facing a crisis. I gathered more intelligence. I pulled up Linda's social media accounts on my computer: Facebook, Instagram, the works. I'd never paid much attention to her online presence before, but now I was looking with different eyes. Her recent posts showed her at various restaurants and events, always smiling, always playing the perfect wife and mother. But I started noticing things that hadn't registered before. Photos from times when Victor was supposedly working late, check-ins at upscale places that seemed expensive for a stay-at-home mom. And in several recent photos, there were wine glasses in the background, 2 of them, when she was supposedly alone. Eugene called me back 45 minutes later, and his voice had that professional tone he used when he had bad news to deliver. "Howard, the Range Rover belongs to Calvin Harrison, 42 years old, lives in Glen Allen. He's a financial advisor at Preston and associates downtown, married to Margaret Harrison for 14 years. They've got 2 kids, clean driving record, decent credit score, up until recently. But here's where it gets interesting. His firm's been flagged by the SEC for some questionable investment practices, and word on the street is they're hemorrhaging clients." Calvin Harrison. The name meant nothing to me, but I wrote it down anyway, along with every other detail Eugene provided. "Eugene, I need you to do a deep dive on this guy. Phone records, credit cards, financial history, everything you can legally access. And I need to know if he's connected to my daughter-in-law Linda somehow." "Howard," Eugene said carefully, "what exactly are we looking at here? Because if this is what I think it is, it's exactly what you think it is. My daughter-in-law is at my family cabin with another man, while my son is in surgery trying to save someone's life. I need to know how deep this goes." Eugene was quiet for a moment. In the background, I could hear him typing on his keyboard. "I'll get back to you by tomorrow morning. And Howard, document everything on your end. Screenshots, recordings, timestamps. If this goes where I think it's going, you'll want a paper trail." I spent the rest of Friday afternoon glued to the security feeds like it was the most important business presentation of my career. Linda and Calvin stayed at the cabin for 3 hours and 17 minutes. I watched them move through the rooms I knew by heart, seeing them occupy spaces that held decades of family memories. At one point, they went out onto the deck, the same deck where I'd taught Victor how to tie fishing knots, where Helen used to sit with her morning coffee and watch the sunrise over the mountains. They left separately, Linda first in her white Lexus SUV, then Calvin about 20 minutes later in the Range Rover, smart, professional. They weren't taking chances being seen together, which told me this wasn't their first time pulling this kind of operation. This had the hallmarks of a practiced routine. Victor called me Friday night at 9:30, exhausted after 15 hours in the operating room. "Dad, the surgery went well. We got all 3 blockages cleared, patient stable, and should make a full recovery. How was your day? Did Oliver make it up to the cabin?" I almost told him right then, almost said, "Son, sit down because I need to tell you something that's going to turn your world upside down." But I didn't. Not yet. I needed more evidence. I needed to understand exactly what I was dealing with before I destroyed my son's life with incomplete information. "Oliver had to reschedule for next week," I said instead. "Everything else was quiet here. You sound beat. Get some rest." "Yeah, I'm heading home now. Linda should be back from Charlotte tomorrow with the kids. I miss them when they're gone, even for a weekend." The trust in his voice, the love, the complete faith in his wife, it made me want to put my fist through the wall. Instead, I told him I loved him and to drive safely. Eugene called me Saturday morning at 8 a.m. sharp with his preliminary report, and it was worse than I'd imagined. Howard, you're not going to like this. Calvin Harrison has been having serious financial problems. The SEC investigation is real. They're looking at his firm for mismanaging client funds, and Calvin specifically is under scrutiny for some high-risk investments that went south. His personal finances are a disaster. But that's not the worst part. I was already reaching for my coffee, knowing I was going to need the caffeine for whatever was coming next. What is it, Eugene? I pulled Linda's credit card records. She's listed as an authorized user on your son's accounts, so it was all legal and above board. Over the past 14 months, she's made some very interesting purchases. Hotels when your son was working late shifts. Expensive restaurants for two when she was supposedly home with the kids. Weekend getaways that she never mentioned to Victor. And here's the kicker. She's been making cash withdrawals. Started small, maybe $200 or $300 at a time, but they've gotten progressively larger. How much larger? Howard, we're talking about $28,000 in cash withdrawals over the past 14 months, always timed perfectly with Victor's surgery schedule or when he was at medical conferences. This woman has been systematically draining your son's accounts to fund an affair. I set down my coffee cup before I dropped it. $28,000, our family money, Victor's money. Money that should have been going toward Carol and Norman's college funds, toward the mortgage on their house, toward building a future for the family. Instead, it had been funding Calvin Harrison's lifestyle while he was under federal investigation for financial crimes. My hands started shaking, and I had to put the phone down for a moment. $28,000. Victor worked 80-hour weeks at the hospital, missing dinners and bedtime stories with his kids, sacrificing time with his family to build a secure future for them. And his wife had been stealing that future, dollar by dollar, to fund an affair with a man who was apparently facing federal charges for financial crimes. There's more, Eugene continued, and I could tell from his voice that it got worse. I did some digging into Calvin Harrison's financial situation. This guy took out a second mortgage on his house 8 months ago. His wife Margaret filed complaints with their bank about missing funds from their joint savings account. $15,000 just vanished. I think Linda's been more than just having an affair. I think she's been bankrolling this guy's lifestyle while his own world falls apart. You're telling me my daughter-in-law is funding a criminal's legal defense? I'm telling you that Calvin Harrison is drowning financially, and Linda appears to be throwing him life preservers made of your son's money. The timing of her cash withdrawals matches perfectly with Calvin's mortgage payments, his legal fees, even some high-end purchases that show up on his credit cards. I hung up the phone and sat in my study for a long time, staring out the window at the backyard where Victor had played as a boy. This wasn't just an affair. This wasn't just emotional betrayal. This was systematic theft. This was a calculated dismantling of my son's financial security to prop up another man's failing life. I needed legal advice, and I needed it from someone who understood both the criminal and family law implications of what Linda had done. I called Patricia Williams, the best family law attorney in Richmond. Patricia and I had worked on opposite sides of several corporate cases over the years. She'd represented executives' wives in divorce proceedings, while I'd been on the corporate side trying to protect company assets. She was sharp, ruthless when necessary, and she understood how to build cases that held up under scrutiny. More importantly, she had no love for cheating spouses who stole marital assets. Patricia, I need advice on a family matter. It's complicated, and it involves both adultery and financial crimes. We met at her office Monday morning. Her conference room overlooked the James River, and I watched barges moving slowly downstream while I laid out everything: the security footage, Eugene's investigation, the bank records, the cash withdrawals, Calvin's SEC troubles, the whole sordid mess. Patricia listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes on her legal pad. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and smiled. Not a happy smile, but the smile of a predator who's just spotted wounded prey. Howard, this is actually excellent news for your son. Virginia is a fault-based divorce state, and what you've described gives us grounds for adultery, but more importantly, it gives us a slam-dunk case for dissipation of marital assets. Linda didn't just cheat, she stole, systematically, to fund her lover's legal problems. That's not just adultery, that's financial fraud. What does that mean for Victor? It means your son is going to get primary custody of those children, and Linda is going to get a fraction of what she might have expected in a normal divorce settlement. This level of deception, this systematic theft, this willingness to put her affair above her children's financial security, no judge in Virginia is going to reward that behavior. Patricia outlined the legal strategy. We needed to move quickly but carefully, document everything, secure the remaining assets, and make sure Linda didn't have a chance to hide or move money before we acted. We also needed to be prepared for Linda to claim the money went to something else: gambling debts, shopping addiction, family emergencies. But Eugene's investigation had already connected the dots between her withdrawals and Calvin's financial timeline. But I had one more idea, something that would make this whole situation a lot more interesting and ensure that justice got served on multiple fronts. I was going to call Margaret Harrison. After I left Patricia's office, I sat in my car in the parking garage for 20 minutes, staring at my phone. I was about to make a call that would change at least 4 lives, probably more. Margaret Harrison had no idea that her husband was having an affair. She had no idea that her missing $15,000 had probably come from my daughter-in-law's theft. She deserved to know the truth, but I also knew that once I made this call, there would be no going back. I dialed her number. She answered on the 3rd ring. Her voice was pleasant, unsuspecting. Probably thought I was trying to sell her insurance or ask her to donate to some charity. "Mrs. Harrison, my name is Howard Reynolds. I'm sorry to bother you, but I have information about your husband that I think you should know." There was a long pause. I could hear a television in the background, maybe children playing. Normal family sounds from what was probably about to become a very abnormal day. "What kind of information?" "I have evidence that Calvin has been having an affair with my daughter-in-law for over a year, and I believe she's been giving him money that was stolen from my son's accounts." The silence on the other end of the line stretched for almost 30 seconds. I was starting to wonder if she'd hung up when she finally spoke. "Mr. Reynolds," Margaret Harrison said, and her voice had changed completely. It was ice cold now, controlled fury barely contained beneath a veneer of politeness. "I think we need to talk, in person." We met at a coffee shop in Short Pump Tuesday morning. Margaret Harrison was 38 years old, blonde, well-dressed, and absolutely furious. She'd driven there in a BMW SUV that probably cost more than most people's annual salary, but I could see the stress lines around her eyes, the way her hands shook, slightly as she stirred her coffee. She'd suspected something was wrong for months, she told me, but couldn't prove it. "The late nights, the mysterious business trips, the money problems," Margaret said, her voice tight with controlled anger. "Calvin told me his firm was going through a rough patch, that we needed to cut back on expenses, but he kept buying expensive clothes, taking trips he claimed were for work. I even found hotel receipts in his jacket pocket, but he said they were for client meetings." I showed her some of the evidence Eugene had compiled, hotel receipts showing Calvin and Linda at the same locations on the same dates, restaurant charges for expensive dinners when Calvin had told Margaret he was working late, credit card statements that painted a picture of a man living well above his means while his wife tightened the family budget. "That son of a bitch," Margaret whispered, staring at the papers spread across our table. "He took money from our children's college funds. He mortgaged our house without explaining why we really needed the cash, all to impress her." We talked for 2 hours, 2 betrayed spouses trying to make sense of how our lives had been systematically dismantled by people we'd trusted completely. By the end of our meeting, we had formed an unlikely alliance and developed a plan that would ensure both Calvin and Linda faced consequences for what they'd done. Margaret was going to confront Calvin the same evening I had Victor confront Linda. Coordinated timing meant neither of them could warn the other, couldn't get their stories straight, couldn't prepare excuses or hide evidence. They'd both be blindsided, just like we had been. We set the date for Wednesday evening, the day before Thanksgiving. Perfect timing. It would force them to face the destruction of their lives during what should have been a time of family gratitude and togetherness. I called Victor Tuesday evening, keeping my voice as normal as possible. "Son, I need you to come by the house Wednesday night. It's important. Family matter that can't wait." "Dad, is everything okay? You sound serious. Are you having health problems?" "Just come by around 6 p.m. Bring Linda if you can manage it. I need to discuss something with both of you, and it's better done in person." Wednesday was the longest day of my life. I kept checking the security cameras at the cabin, half expecting to see the Range Rover again. I reviewed all the evidence one more time with Patricia, making sure every document was organized, every timeline clear, every piece of evidence bulletproof. Victor and Linda arrived at 6:15 p.m. Carol and Norman were at Linda's mother's house in Charlotte, supposedly still visiting from their weekend trip, which was perfect. This conversation wasn't for children's ears. "Dad, what's going on?" Victor asked as they settled into my living room. He looked exhausted. He'd been pulling double shifts to cover for a colleague who was out sick. "You're making me nervous with all the mystery." Linda was fidgeting with her purse, avoiding eye contact. Something in her body language told me she suspected this wasn't going to be a normal family visit. I set my laptop on the coffee table and opened the security footage from Friday afternoon. "Linda," I said, keeping my voice calm and professional, "I think you need to explain this." I pressed play. The high-definition video showed the Range Rover pulling into our cabin driveway with perfect clarity. Linda getting out, checking her phone, looking around like she was making sure no one was watching. Then Calvin Harrison stepping out of the passenger side, confident and comfortable, like he'd been there before. Linda's face went white. She started shaking her head before the video finished playing. "It's not what you think. I can explain." Victor was staring at the screen, confused and starting to look sick. "Linda, who is that man? I thought you were taking the kids to your mother's house." "I was," she said quickly, desperately. "I did take them to Charlotte. I needed to check on the cabin after that storm. He's a friend from college. He was helping me assess the damage." I stopped the video and opened the next folder. Hotel receipts dating back 14 months, restaurant bills for expensive dinners, bank records showing systematic cash withdrawals totaling $28,000, credit card records showing purchases that matched perfectly with Calvin's timeline. "Linda," I said, my voice still calm but with steel underneath, "I know about the 14 months. I know about the $28,000 you stole from my son. I know about Calvin Harrison's SEC investigation and how you've been funding his legal defense with Victor's money." Victor looked like someone had hit him with a sledgehammer. He stood up unsteadily and walked to the window, the same window where he'd stood as a boy waiting for me to come home from work. "What are you talking about, Dad?" he said, without turning around. $28,000? I laid it all out methodically, like I was presenting to a board of directors. The affair, the systematic theft, Calvin's financial crimes and federal investigation, Margaret Harrison's missing savings. The paper trail that Eugene had compiled, showing Linda systematically stealing from their joint accounts to support her lover's crumbling life. Linda broke down completely, sobbing and begging. She admitted to the affair, but claimed it didn't mean anything. She said Calvin was in trouble and needed help, and she just wanted to help someone she cared about. "Someone you cared about?" Victor's voice was barely audible. "Linda, you stole from our children's future. You've been lying to me every single day for over a year. You brought this man to the place where my mother used to sit and read her books." "Victor, please," Linda begged, reaching for him. "I made a mistake. I'll stop seeing him. I'll pay back every penny. Please don't throw away our family over this." That's when I played my final card. "Linda, Margaret Harrison confronted her husband 2 hours ago. She has all the same evidence I'm showing you. Your affair is over, one way or another. Calvin's already been served with divorce papers." Linda stared at me like I'd physically struck her. "You called his wife?" "I called a woman who deserved to know the truth, just like my son deserved to know the truth." Victor turned around slowly. When he spoke, his voice was steady for the first time that evening. "I want a divorce. Tonight. I want you out of this house." The next few months were difficult but necessary. Patricia Williams was brilliant, using the financial theft to demonstrate that Linda couldn't be trusted with the children's welfare. The evidence was overwhelming: the systematic deception, the stolen money, the poor judgment in bringing her lover to family property. Victor was awarded primary custody of Carol and Norman. Linda got supervised visitation every other weekend. The property settlement heavily favored Victor, accounting for every dollar she'd stolen. Calvin Harrison's life collapsed completely. The SEC investigation led to criminal charges. His firm folded. Margaret divorced him and got the house, the remaining assets, and primary custody of their children. Last I heard, Calvin was working at a used car lot in Petersburg, living in a studio apartment, and paying court-ordered support to 2 families. I still have the mountain cabin. I went back there last month, the first time since that Friday afternoon. The new deck railings Oliver installed look solid. I sat on the porch and watched the sunset paint the mountains purple and gold. Victor brought Carol and Norman up the next weekend. They ran around the yard playing hide and seek, their laughter echoing through the trees like music. Victor sat beside me on the deck with 2 cups of coffee. "Dad," he said, "how did you know what to do? How did you know the right way to handle all this?" I thought about it for a moment. "Son, 30 years in business taught me that when someone betrays you, document everything, build your case, and strike when you have overwhelming evidence. But this wasn't really a business deal. This was about protecting you and those kids. That made it the most important case I've ever worked." Victor nodded slowly. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't caught them. How much more money she would have stolen. How much longer the lies would have gone on." My phone buzzed that evening. A text from Margaret Harrison. She'd met someone new, she said, a good man who treated her and her children well. She wanted to thank me again for the phone call that changed her life. I texted back that I was happy for her, that she and her kids deserved good things. Victor is rebuilding his life now. He started dating again recently, a pediatric nurse from his hospital. She's kind, genuine, nothing like Linda. When I met her last week, she looked me in the eye and said Victor had told her wonderful things about me. That night, after they left, I sat in my study with a bourbon and thought about everything that had happened: the cabin, the security cameras, the investigation, the coordinated confrontation, the legal proceedings. It had been a long road, painful but necessary. Looking at my son now, seeing him start to heal, watching my grandchildren laugh and play without knowing how close they came to a very different kind of life, I knew I'd made the right choices. That's what fathers do. We protect our legacy. And my legacy isn't the business I built or the money I made. It's the family I leave behind. Sometimes the most powerful revenge isn't destroying your enemy. It's simply giving everyone the truth and letting justice take its natural course. I learned that protecting your family isn't about being the strongest man in the room. It's about being the smartest one, and knowing that love expressed through wisdom lasts longer than love expressed through anger.